This is going to be a bizarre video. And if you like scripted, well planned out things, this is not it. This is alive. This is flying by the seat of your pants. But what I want to talk about is how bizarre the world is, that things that are seemingly easy to understand, nobody understands. Things that are obvious beyond all common sense, people don't see, they don't understand. And when I say people, I'm talking about pretty close to 100% of the population of the planet. Maybe only a handful out of 7 billion see what I'm talking about. But the issue with who created us, who created God, these fairly deep subjects, you've heard before, I'm sure, the old, when I say old, people have brought it up, well, could God create a rock too big to move? And, well, they say, well, God can create anything. Well, can God create a rock too big for God to move? And then you get yourself into a conundrum there where it becomes ridiculous and silly because it is. So the issue with the non-duality, well, it's true with the duality too, but the non-duality folks, believers, what they're saying essentially is the same thing, that can God create a rock too big to move? And if a non-duality person would have to say, yes, God can create a rock that is too big for God to move. Because what they're saying is God can create us, and we are too unaware to realize that we are God. So if a person says, well, yes, I'm aware that I am God, well, you're ignorant, because what you're aware of is what you've been taught. You've never actually experienced being God. All you've experienced is ignorance of being God. And the body is God. The physical body is God. And you can conclude that. But what you can't conclude is that most bodies, most people are ignorant. It doesn't matter how much effort you put into teaching them, they're never going to be so aware that they're God that they just start creating universes with the wave of their hand and raising the dead and walking on water. And you know, if you say you're God, by damned, you're going to have to prove it. Otherwise, you're just like all the other fanatics out there. In fact, you're no different than all the fanatics out there. if in the concept of non-duality you can say that you are an ignorant person that is unaware and that is at the same time God, you're saying the same thing that the other people say, that God can God create a boulder too big to move. You're saying the exact same thing. So if you really do believe you're God, you're going to have to absolutely, beyond shadow of a doubt, prove it to me and anyone else. Otherwise, you're delusional. Well, there's another way of putting it. You may not be delusional, because the word delusional means you're creating a reality that isn't real. But instead, you're not really doing that. All you're doing is following a belief system that was taught to you by somebody else. So it's not really delusional, it's just believing in a belief. So the other concept is time and space. And they say, well, God created time and space, but for God, time and space doesn't exist. But God created time and space. So if God created time and space, God created it from a concept of time and space. So does that mean time and space exists for God? Well, no, it doesn't. But it does if God creates it for God, God's own purpose or God's own sake. If you are in a dream at night and you imagine a reality and then you awaken, what part of that reality is real? Well, none of it in the physical sense, but you probably cannot escape the fact that it required time to create the dream, because you can hook diodes up to your brain and this and that and everything else, and scientists can say that, this is what was taking place while you were dreaming. But who the hell knows what the scientists are detecting? So what that there's synaptics taking place in the brain? So what that there's electricity moving here and moving there? They don't have a camera hooked up to the brain of someone and they're seeing the same thing. All they're seeing is a bunch of electrical stuff taking place. They have no idea what the dream is. They can record it with all their fantastic devices, and then the person wakes up, and then the scientists, they go, wow, you really had a big dream. And the dreamer could say, yeah, I did. What was it about, says the dreamer to the scientist, and the scientist would say, how am I supposed to know? I didn't have the dream, you did. Because the scientist has no idea. They say, well, this took place in your head, therefore that was a dream. That's just not true. That's like saying you are your body. Well, from a spiritual standpoint, we know that we are not our body. On the same token, if you're spiritual, then you also know that the dream at night had nothing to do with the electrical synapses and this and that inside your brain. Yes, it's taking place, and yes, it's in working at the same time, and something's taking place, but that's not what's creating the dream. The dream is created in a reality that has no physicality to it whatsoever. And it's manifesting in a realm that has no space, no time. It exists outside of this reality. And when you awaken, you remember that dream into this reality. But you forget a lot of it most of the time. No, the reality is God created God. and we create ourselves. And the original essence of what we are has no mass, time, space, or anything. Awareness or love has no tangibility to it. So the other question could say, well, then why did God create us? Or why did God create this reality? Well, one of the major aspects of God is that God is after the knowledge of all things. God knows everything. But God is continually developing and growing. But how God is continually developing and growing is through us. Because that's one of the reasons God created us. When I say created, he did not create our essence. He only created the physical body. And I mean only because I could rephrase it and say God only created everything. But the essence of what we are isn't something that can be included into everything. So God created this scenario to take place so that we can create ourselves. And why? Because God does not know what we are prior to our first choice. Quite possibly, God doesn't know who I am right now. Probably God does at this point in my existence. But I'm not entirely sure. The reality is, I don't know who I am yet. I think I do. But as the scenarios keep playing out and I keep choosing, because God puts this and God puts that in this reality, and there's earthquakes and explosions, and there's evil people and loving people and good people, and there's money, no money, everything creates an environment so that you can create yourself from the choices you make. And that's what I'm doing. And since God is this body, God knows 100% of what I know. If I say a prayer to God, it can be silent or it can be loud. It doesn't make any difference because it's emanating from the physical body and the brain and the mind and the spirit that is God. So God knows what I'm going to say before I say it, obviously, because God is this. But God is creating this blossoming, growing reality so that you and I can create ourselves. And the main there's two reasons, but there's a lot of reasons, I suspect. But the main two reasons is because God desires to know everything. And so as you create yourself, God gets to understand and know you. So that's enlarging the awareness or the knowledge of God. That's one reason. The other main reason is God does it out of love. So, yeah, it might be discouraging if there is a possibility of being discouraged when these essences grow up to be opposed to God. Opposition to God is the description of evil or sin. Opposition to God. And I suppose there's varying degrees. Now, getting back to the non-dualists, they'll say there is no such thing as sin. There is no such thing as bad. But they are experiencing what is referred to as cognitive dissonance, because we all know that there are children being raped and murdered on a daily basis in the world. Of course, that's just one tiny little thing compared to the whole world of evil. And so evil does exist. But you can put your blinders on and convince yourself that raping little children is not evil. You can do that if you want. That is one of your options to choose from in this crazy mixed up world. And then God is getting to know you. But we have reincarnation. And who knows how many lives we cycle through. Samsara, the wheel of, who knows how many lives we cycle through. But, and how many planets we cycle through. And have we been doing this for 1 trillion years, or how many Big Bangs? I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, if you truly love God, and you're on that path to becoming one with God, well, then you just don't simply care about how far along the path you are. Because Buddha pegged it. It is difficult, and it is a living hell in many cases. Again, cognitive dissonance goes the Christians, because the God they worship was hung on a cross and killed, murdered. Well, he's coming back. Yeah, right, 2,000 years and he still hasn't come back. But that's not to denigrate Jesus in any way, shape, or form. He definitely did suffer and die for everyone's sins. His atonement is exactly what, well, it's not exactly what the Christians think, but it is. He did do that. And he could be construed as the path to God, if that's what you choose. And in fact, you should. The problem is there is no Christian organized system on the planet that isn't completely and utterly corrupt. But that doesn't matter. That's just part of the illusion. That's how this reality exists. Anyways, I said this is going to be a bizarre one. I hope you like it. Thanks for watching.